So hopefully there was a happy ending to all this. So, is there any questions?
Should be the heavy story.
I know, I got lost in this thing many times.
Where was the reservation at here in Yacht?
Prison. Where was the prison?
Well, it was a bit of both. It was a reservation, and the Indian people built houses here, and in fact, they kind of took over the Yachats Indians' fish weirs. You know, they left behind fish weirs, like these rocks and arrangements in the river to trap fish, but you know, they weren't allowed to leave the reservation, so it was kind of a strange combo of home and prison camp. But as I recall from looking at maps, the bulk of the settlement was on the north side of the river, so essentially it's where town is now. I mean, the town's built pretty much on top of the old reservation settlement that was made up here.
I know,
You've looked at the maps
down
now.
there. I've talked to Robert before. My mother was raised here. She was here in 1900. And they did live at the agency house. Both her parents and her grandparents lived there. They were, fortunately, as I researched genealogically, they were not one of the agents that were so careless with the population. But she's long dead. But she and her younger sister, who was born in Yachats in 1900, talked about, they lived at the agency house where the cemetery now is. And the Indians were camped out in here in pit houses. And yes, they caught salmon and shellfish, and they would dry the salmon on these racks. And they always wanted the salmon heads facing in to bring, that was a cultural thing. They wanted the salmon to come in. My mother and her little sister would run around and turn the salmon around facing out. The Indian women would get very upset with them. They would run around and scold and turn the fish around. So yes, they were right in this area.
So that's their memories from even after 1900.
Yes, yeah, she was born in 1895. My aunt was born in 1900. My mother was born outside Salem, West Salem. But they purchased the Yachats, a good part of the Yachats land, in about 1880. My sister and I have done a tremendous amount of genealogical research on that, and at that time, there was no Lincoln County. It was part of Benton County. And Benton County's archivists are not interested in letting us have access to any of those old records.
Wow.
So my aunt did graduate from high school in Walford in 1917. My mother graduated in Salem, but we had a crop of kids. They were here all summer long. They brought cattle over through Five Rivers and down the Yachats River, or sometimes through north of Walford and across the ferry. And they would bring cattle here. And the pictures I have, and that are some of you've seen, some of them at the Little Log Church, where there are pictures of the house and the barn where the cemetery is. The trees were way up the hill. It was much, much more open than it is now. Yeah, much more of a prairie. Yeah.
We have a photograph collection that we just purchased from the descendant of a Siletz agent. And a lot of the photos in there were taken by an LC tribal member, Thomas Jackson, who started taking photographs in the late 1890s, well, probably mid-1890s. And he had a photo studio in Siletz at different times. But he also did snapshots kind of around the countryside. And there's a 1906 photo of his wife and children standing in the Yachats, at the mouth of the Yachats River. So he must be taking the photograph. He's not in the photo. You know, it's kind of in that time period of your mother and aunt's recollection, and they may have been coming down here and setting up fish camp themselves. And so Lucinda Jackson might have been one of the women getting mad at your mother and aunt.
There is picture at the Oregon Historical Society, and I've seen this many times in old magazines like Oregon Coast and stuff. a canoe and a bear, a dead bear in front of the canoe. My great uncle took that picture. That was his canoe. They don't, Oregon Historical Society, I don't think it's real well because they won't agree if I give them stuff that it will stay in Oregon. Both they and University of Oregon, who have seen some of my stuff, will not sign a paper saying that these artifacts will stay in Oregon. And I'm not willing to give them unless they stay, unless I have a place for them to stay in Oregon.
I've heard a lot of places having policies like that.
Yeah, they'll sell them if they find something they want there. So, until I find a place for some of these things to go. And right now, to my knowledge, Warm Springs has the only, am I right, museum? The global knowledge.
Yeah, Umatilla has one. We have a collection storage facility and are working on the phase 2 plan, which is going to be the exhibits and permanent storage.
Since I have beaded, buckskin beaded stuff, I have a papoose board. Actually, it was made for my daughter, along the Columbia River, and some other things that are much older. I keep waiting for somebody to say, we'll keep it. I want it available for people to see, for people to study, but I don't want it sold and go out of the area. That's not.
So did your family have connections with Warm Springs folks up along the Columbia?
My parents died when I was fairly young, though my mother had a cabin here, and that's why I returned here when I retired. But my aunt and uncle had a large cattle ranch, cattle, wheat, and sheep ranch near Maryhill. So I was raised with the Umpqua Indians. At the time I was young, it was a one-room schoolhouse with papooses hanging in the hallway on the coat hooks. And the children and the old people would not speak English. Some of them could, but would not. But they spoke what I'm understanding now is a Siletz trade language. And my uncle and I spoke that until he died here in Yahats about 15 years ago.
Must be Chinook jargon.
Huh?
Must be Chinook jargon.
That's what I talked to several people about, and they say it's a Siletz trade jargon, Chinook jargon. Yeah. So I've forgotten most of it. I might forget.
You better put it on tape. Katrina?
I don't have the original book anymore, but I have a copy of the very old Chinook jargon dictionary between English and Chinook jargon.
Actually, if you go online, like, a used book site, you can usually turn up a lot of jargon dictionaries, because at one time, it was a widely used language in the Pacific Northwest for different tribes to talk to each other, and whites to talk to Indians, and all back around again. And you see a lot of place names in the Pacific Northwest derived from Chinook jargon words. So it's actually not too hard to find, old books that are jargon English.
A lot of recent arrival non-Indian people used it to talk to each other too, because it would be a common language. If one family was from Germany, the other from Sweden or Finland, or they would pick up jargon pretty quickly. It has not that big of a vocabulary, and that was how people communicated throughout the Northwest, not just the Indian people, but non-Indian.
Good.